guys, we might get started. Welcome to 2101. I'm Holly. I'll be your course coordinator as we navigate the semester together. Today we're going to go through, as usual in your first lecture, an overview of what to expect, and then we're going to dive straight into nutrition, and then we're having someone to come talk to us about ethical decision making in here. So it's a lot today, and at the beginning it's just going to be me talking for a bit, which won't be like the rest of the workshops, but we've just got to get through it. So first and most important, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that we're meeting in, and we're going to be learning a lot from on this land this semester, and acknowledge and pay our respects to their ancestors, past, present and emerging. We recognise their really valuable contributions to society. So before I tell you what I expect from you from the semester, I think it's only fair that you know a bit about me and what you can expect from me. So my name is Holly, as I said. I did my Bachelor of Pharmacy here as well, and then I went on and did community pharmacy, and I came back to do a PhD in medication adherence. So my passion is all about why people don't take their medicines, despite us pharmacists telling them to and understanding that. And I particularly like asthma, which we do not cover in here. So that's my background. The weird thing about me compared to most of the people that work here is that I only work 3 days a week. I work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which aligns really nicely with 2101. And the reason I only work 3 days a week, on my 2 days off, I look after these boys. And so what that means on Monday, Tuesday, I'm less likely to be able to reply to an email. I often do, but just be aware I'm not actually here. I'm really conscious around exams and assessment that you guys might have more questions, and I'm aware of that. But just so you know that Monday, Tuesday, I'm not on site. But either are you for 2101, right? So, as I said, today's workshop, I'm going to give you an overview of what to expect. Then we'll dive into our first module of nutrition, and then Will come and talk to us about ethics. This is your timetable. I've tried to put what you need to know on there to keep you on track and some of the main points, and we'll go through all this. The main thing to get across to you guys early is we cover so much in 2101. It is a big step up, but I'm here, we're going to get through it together and you're going to be all right. But we do cover lots of conditions that you see as pharmacists. And so every week we are basically learning new conditions. And so you've got to keep, as you know, you've got to keep on track with your learning. Life happens. If something happens in a week and you miss a module, you'll be fine. My suggestion is you skip it and go to the next module rather than try and then catch up. If you can catch up on the weekend, that's great. But skip it and come back to it at some point when you have time, in a break or something like that. So don't stress if it happens. Try not to do it, but if life happens, something happens, you'll be fine. So how do we learn in 2101? As you know, UQ Extend is there. And each week it says how many hours you're expected, which is usually 15 hours, which is a lot, right? You can't do the 15 hours. You can't do it all in one go. You've got to break it up. We have engagement tasks, and what I decided to do this year is to make them individual mini quizzes. And the reason I did this and I changed it is because people told me last year that they wanted help with questions for the exam. What were the MCQ or the multiple response like in the exam? So I changed to this. And so these will help you see how you're going with your learning each week or every 2 weeks, keep you on track, and give you some idea of some of the questions that will be on your exam. These questions won't be on your exam, but the type. There's no short answer in these. They're all automatically marked questions, so different types of automatically marked questions. But just keeps you on your learning. It's 10 questions every 2 weeks. After these, we have PASS or TBL sessions for 1 hour. What that means is this room is available to you if you so choose to use it. Because we're not doing these group engagement tasks, potentially it's less needed, but we do have a group assignment, so you're welcome to use this. I'll hang around for a bit if you need me, but if there's no one here, I'll go as well. So then on Wednesdays, we have our workshops. And how I'm here most weeks, we have the School of Biomedical Science come in some weeks before me and teach the physiology and pharmacology, and then I come in and teach the therapeutics. But each week, my goal is really to help you. I understand the UQ Extend can be a lot, and sometimes it's hard to see what are the big pictures. As we go, I will help you with that. We want to summarize the key points that you need to know as pharmacists. And then we'll do some case scenarios and practice questions because the case scenarios are kind of like what's in the exam as well. The tutorials are tomorrow on Thursdays, and these are all about applying all that knowledge you've learned in the workshops and UQ Extend as a practicing pharmacist. They grow your communication skills, your problem-solving skills. Within those tutorials as well, we'll have 2 practice OSCEs and 1 practice professional skills exam, which I'll go through in a minute. And we also create evidence for a portfolio, a professional practice portfolio. The tutorials align with your UQ Extend, so whatever we're covering that week, we'll cover in the tutorials. And every week, we pretty much cover how you're going to be assessed in your OSCE. I just want to say this so I don't have to be security tomorrow. You have to attend your allocated tutorial. I appreciate that everyone wants the 10 to 12 or the 1 to 3. I get it, there's just not enough space to have you all there. If you are not allocated in that, you can't attend. We can't let more people in than is allowed. And so if you have issues, you can come talk to me. I can't do anything about it. If you're not there, you can go on the wait list. Feel free to come talk to me. And if I can see if there's another solution. Lastly, we've got 1 practical on a Tuesday in week 5, which I'll remind you about. This is run by the School of Biomedical Science. It's pretty cool practical. It's related to diabetes, and you'll be doing an oral glucose tolerance test on yourself. Pregnant women get this, other people get it getting tested for diabetes. And the purpose is to see it in real life. What happens when you consume glucose to your blood sugars? And it also gives you an understanding when you're talking to patients about this, what actually goes on. Now, there's a few things I know about this. If for some reason I've just told you that and it causes you stress because you have a needle phobia, I know it's unfortunately during Ramadan. You do not need to do it in the way that you don't want to do it. So if you can't consume the glucose, that is okay. If you're worried about needles, that is okay. I still highly recommend you attend, because you'll still get something out of it. You can work with a friend or a colleague, but don't stress if there's some reason you can't do this. It's not compulsory in the sense that you have to be consuming the glucose. You don't have to. You should be allocated this as well. So together, this will prepare you really well for all your exams. But they all work together, and that's the challenge. You can't just do one of them. So I think I've talked some about this, but what have we got? UQ Extend. The hard thing I find when you come into second year is the sheer volume of content you're getting. So we have to teach you a lot in a couple of years. And so people come to me and say, well, I can't memorize everything. And you can't memorize everything. Use the learning objectives at the beginning of your UQ Extend to guide you. This week we just did is a bit of a funny week because it's nutrition, it's big, and it's just about diet and exercise and some meds. So it's not the best week to give you a new example. But in the coming weeks, pretty much every week, we learn the normal physiology of something, for example, the pancreas. And then we learn the pathophysiology. What happens if something goes wrong with the pancreas? You get diabetes. What are the signs and symptoms of diabetes? How do you diagnose it? And then we learn the drugs to treat those conditions. And so for me, I find that a helpful way when I'm teaching it to make sure we're covering the bases. And that is, for most weeks, a really good way for you. If you need guidance on what you need to learn each week, that's pretty much it. On the 13th of March, I'll send a reminder. If you're finding it hard, we're getting a learning advisor will come in and give a talk about this. He's really, really great about studying smarter and not harder, and also how to use AI smartly, wisely. So I'll put a reminder on that, but he's coming to PACE to talk to us, if you might find that helpful. If you need more help, and I didn't learn this until last year, but you can actually make one-on-one consultations with learning advisors who will help you in any way that you need help. How do I get through this UQ-Extend module? How do I do this exam? How do I do this assignment? I'm not going to tell you how to do this assignment, but they'll develop a strategy for you, and they will meet you. I think they even come to PACE if you want to book here. So if you're stressing in the next couple of weeks, you will be fine. It does take an adjustment, but there's help there if you need more help. You can also come and see me if you're struggling, and we can work out a strategy. Don't leave it to week 13 where I can't help you. Come and see me earlier rather than later. Your personal medicines formulary, I'll put that up today. That's just a way for you at the end of the semester in particular to think, what are all the medicines that we've covered and where do they fit? So I see category 1 medicines as you should be able to counsel a patient really effectively on that medicine and talk to a health professional about it as well. So answer any questions. So that's pretty much know a lot about those medicines. Then I put all the other categories in, know what it is, know a bit about it, but not to the same extent as category 1. So how I use this formulary in this course is you could be asked any of these medicines in your OSCE. It's not just Cat 1, and I'll remind us later of this, there will be a question on your exam, your written exam, where you'll have to counsel a patient on a Cat 1 medicine. So there will definitely be a question, and it'll say, give you some information, prepare a counselling script for a patient on this medicine. So for you, you know that it's coming. For me, hopefully that means you will learn all these medicines, because they're really important medicines that you will see as a pharmacist. And so that's why I put them there. Okay, assessment. The engagement tasks, I said, I'll release the first one tomorrow. They cover 2 weeks. So don't do it until you've done the second of that module. They're not difficult. They're only worth 2% each. You have 15 minutes, 10 questions, all automatically marked. What you get correct and incorrect won't be released until after the due date. The next thing to talk about, and we'll talk more on this on the tutorial because it's really what we do in the tutorials, is the professional practice portfolio. So you've now gone on to second year. I'm becoming less interested in me marking your accuracy, particularly in dispensing. You've been signed off that you can do that now. We want to still practice it, but I want to move the onus on you and your peers to check that. And so here in 2101, I don't assess, is that right or wrong? What I'm more interested in is that you can identify that it's right or wrong. And so what we do in our portfolio is each week, when we're in our tutorials, we do dispensing most weeks, and we generate a label. We take a photo of that label and we upload it to a portfolio and we just save it. I don't look at it, okay? We also practice information gathering, talking to doctors and counselling patients. Each step there is also evidence, which we record on your phone or on a device, and we upload to the e-portfolio. I don't look at these. Then, at 2 time points, week 6 and week 12, you pick a certain number, 3 in portfolio 1 at week 6 and 8 in portfolio 2. You choose these 3 or 8 pieces of evidence and you submit them to me. And what you have to submit is, why did you choose these? Reflect on your growth over that time and set a goal for the future. So what this means is, if you dispense on your first dispense and you make lots of mistakes, or you do information gathering in your first tutorial tomorrow and you weren't great at it, I don't expect you to. You potentially haven't done it for, 8, 12 weeks. That's fine. What I want you to do is reflect on that, and I want to see some growth. So I don't mind if you submit something and you've made a mistake, as long as you identify that mistake and you discuss it, and there is some growth, or what you could do to make it better. So we'll talk a bit more about that in the tutorials tomorrow. And it's not really something to worry about now. We just make sure we're collecting evidence. You will have so much evidence. Now, I recommend you save it to the e-portfolio, and there's a spot there, and I'll show you how to do it. You can save it on your phone. It's up to you. You just make sure you have that evidence somewhere when it comes to submission. The first one is not a hurdle, and so this is sort of a practice run, right? For the second one, which is a hurdle, which means you must pass it. Like I said, it's not about perfection. We just want to see a development of skills in 2101. This is our one group assignment. It's an in-service presentation, so it's a recorded video presentation where you need, as a group of pharmacists, educate another healthcare professional group on a topic of your choice. So, for example, last year, a lot of the students did Monjaro, Tirzepatide. It wasn't around at the time, or it wasn't on the TGA, and educated potentially GPs or something like that on that, as you're using your expertise as a pharmacist. We'll talk about this a bit closer. What I want you to think about now is I decided you guys can just pick your own groups. I think that works well. If you don't have a group, that's fine. I'll assign you. But to start, think of groups of, it has to be 4 or 5. Can't be more, can't be less. And by the end of week 3, there's a sign up on your Blackboard site here where you should, I haven't done this before, should work, that you can put all of you in a group. It has to be done by the end of week 3, as I'm going to assign you this. We won't be using Microsoft Teams officially here because I figure you can use Teams. It's open to you if you want for groups, but use what works for you. There's no submission via Teams or anything like that. Okay, the next one is the professional skills exam. This is done in your week 9 tutorial. It's a hurdle. So I put hurdles on anything that I need to show that you can do before you go to placement next semester. So this semester is a hard semester because it is before placement. And so if you can't go on placement until you pass this course. And so we need to show certain evidence that you can do things or you're developing towards them. And this is what the professional skills exam does. So it'll be during the week 9 tutorial on the dispensing computers using Inspera. And it's 2 stations on that Inspera exam. The first one is you'll be presented a prescription on the Inspera screen and a case scenario of that prescription. And you will need to identify if there are any legal or clinical problems with that prescription and the clinical scenario given to you. You have access to resources because at the pharmacy you would have access to resources. So they will all be available to you. We will practice this nearly every week in our tutorials as well. The second thing you'll need to do is explain a decision-making process related to an ethical or legal case. And we'll go through this today. That's what Will's going to come and talk us through. Because one of the challenges of pharmacy is we're faced with dilemmas all the time. The guidelines say this, the patient wants this, what do we do? And we need to start growing our own and not relying on the pharmacist, what they do. Potentially that's not right, or ethical or legal, and making sure we're aware of that and how to do it. So no dispensing, and we have resources. We have legal frameworks, ethical frameworks, and guidelines to support you. The written exam is at the end of semester as well. It's on Inspera. It's an invigilated exam. It's case-based scenarios. Again, the automatically marked questions will help you. There's sample exams as well. This exam, I'm not going to trick you. I can promise you there's not going to be a small detail in UQ Extend that I would expect. What molecule makes up this fat? I would never ask you that. because I wouldn't expect a pharmacist. I wouldn't know it. I want to ask you things that you will use as a pharmacist. What is the first line treatment for diabetes, and how would you counsel someone? How would you know if this is type 1 or type 2 diabetes? That kind of thing, okay? So don't worry that I'm going to ask some minuscule thing, because that doesn't make sense. You wouldn't expect to know a pharmacist to know that, so I wouldn't expect you to know it. Oh, nearly there, OSCE. So the last one is the OSCE. So this is 25% as well, and it's a hurdle as well. And it's in person, face-to-face, end of semester, and it'll go for the actual OSCE of 20 minutes. But as you know, you can be in that holding room, unfortunately, for a bit of time. And so, again, we practice this nearly every week in our tutorials, so don't worry about it. You get so much practice. And what it will look like is someone will hand you a prescription. You'll have to gather some information about that prescription. There will be a clinical problem with that prescription. You'll need to talk to a healthcare professional to correct the problem and then counsel the patient on a medicine. And these will be 3 separate stations, but you'll have 20 minutes to use that time as you like. Now, I don't like to start it with all that because you will be fine. We've set you up to give you lots of practice and to support you. And the really important thing to point out is that we just want to see developing skills. We are not expecting mastery. That's great, but you shouldn't have that. You're a second year. You're not 4th year going into intern. And particularly with the OSCE, we just want to see a development of skills. That you're safe in your practice, and you'll be fine. We will use the OSCE rubrics throughout as well, so that I can prove to you that that's what we're assessing. So throughout the semester, if you have a question, the Ed discussion board works pretty well, I find. People usually, if you have a question, there's probably someone of the 280 that also has that question, so ask it on there. You can email me if you have a personal issue. You can also private message me on Ed discussion as well. And if it's administrative, you can ask Pharmacy Ed Inquirers. They're really good. I'm not great at administrative stuff, so sometimes you'll email me. Unfortunately, I just forward it on to them. So anything administrative, ask them. Don't leave things till week 13. Come see me after a workshop. If in a couple of weeks you're really stressed or something's not working, that's when I can help you. I can't help you in week 13. Well, less likely. So that's all in the course overview. Questions? No? Maybe questions later. Okay, well, let's just get started on the nutrition. Who knows what this is? This is like showing my age. Who is this giraffe and what is his name? What's his name? Harold. And what did Harold teach? Why are these kids going into Harold's van? Does anyone know? Did anyone go into Harold's van? Yeah, what did Harold teach you? Do you remember? What did Harold teach you?
Stuff about nutrition.
Okay. Yep. So Harold taught some people about nutrition, drugs, and awareness about that. So Harold was my only source of nutritional information as a child, besides my family. Other than that, people aren't being told about nutrition, and so if they grow up in an environment that nutrition is different to societal values of health, then Harold was our only way of learning about nutrition. I don't know where Harold's gone. I looked him up, he still exists, but I haven't seen him in schools these days. So maybe we don't even Harold now. And so what this means is that you as pharmacists are one of the most accessible healthcare professionals. We are free, right? Unfortunately, we provide a lot of free advice. And so we play a super important role in educating or supporting our consumers in diet, physical activity, and weight management. They can walk into our chemist, our pharmacy, and have a discussion any time of our opening hours. There's no other healthcare professional that you can do that for free. And so we play a really vital role in providing good and accurate nutritional and physical activity advice, but also understanding the patient we have in front of us. And so nutrition, what I would suggest is you navigate the UQ Extend of nutrition, but potentially park it and then do the rest of the semester, and then you'll come back to it and it may make more sense. Because we do so many conditions where these are really important. I've talked a lot about diabetes because that's a clear one, but we've got mental health, we've got thyroid, gastrointestinal. And so all these things, diet, physical activity, weight management, play a really important role. And so particularly at your OSCE, you'll always have opportunities to talk to people about these things. But to do it really well, you need to be personal about it, right? Someone comes in and they can't walk, you can't go tell them to go for a run. That's not personal, it's not the right advice. The same with diet. Your diet and what foods are important to you may be very different to someone else. And so another thing I forgot to mention about 2101 is this patient-centered care. All that means is that you're not just saying what's in the textbooks, but giving an understanding of the patient in front of you and providing relevant information. The other thing I think sometimes my husband says to me a lot, he's like, oh, you're such a pharmacist, you just talk about medicines. And I think we do forget that sometimes, that we are the medicine expert, but that is only one component of someone's health. And these other things play a really important role, and they're not in silos. So making sure we understand that is a really critical thing as well. So this is just the Padlet that some of you filled out. And I think it's a really nice way to start, is that food is cultural, food is personal. I think we socialize a lot around food. And so there's often huge reasons why people eat the way they eat, and how they view food is different to ours. There's also these truths, these myths about food and what they can do for you. There's so many. I call my mum and if I'm sniffling a tiny bit, she'll tell me to have a big glass of orange juice for the vitamin C. And so a lot of these things there's no evidence behind, because who's going to do an RCT of orange juice versus no orange juice? They cost a lot of money. But we think, well, vitamin C does this, and oranges have a lot of vitamin C in them, so they may help with immunity and colds. What else did I see? Sick food, slimy ham. Yes, I think slimy ham is a no-go. That is a sign that it's gone off potentially. Drinking plenty of water. I think there was a lot about hot honey drinks when you're feeling sick. And so people use food medicinally as well. Despite there not being evidence behind it, it may make you feel better, and it may actually work, we just haven't got the trials behind it. So we have to then first, what makes a diet healthy? And in Australia, that could be very different to somewhere in Japan, America, and so on. But we're going to go on the Australian guidelines of what makes a diet healthy, and it's pretty broad. And the main thing we need to do is eat a wide variety, right? They are the main words here, that you need to eat a wide variety of nutritious foods as your main source of foods. We learnt this at school, I think. How is this not? Around the 5 food groups. And so I think sometimes misconceptions out there for consumers is there's so much advertising on diets and that they need to only eat a certain food. It's not sustainable and it's not healthy. That you need to eat a wide variety. And then you limit your intake of these sometimes foods. This is what I talk to my boys about, sometimes foods, which means we should enjoy them, but not all the time, right? It's not sustainable, again, to potentially not eat these foods if you enjoy them. They're fine if you enjoy them in small amounts. The other thing I think to point out is sometimes people, fruit and veggies are expensive. There's nothing wrong with frozen foods, frozen fruit, frozen vegetables. They can offer similar nutritional value. They're often more affordable, easier to store. And so when we talk to consumers about this, pointing that out, same with canned food, sometimes there's a lot of sodium in it, but you can get low sodium now. You can get this in other ways, which are often more affordable. And then if we make it ourselves, that is usually the best option, which I think everyone knows that's just hard to make, right? But if you make a cake at home and you put sugar in it, that's usually a lot better than a cake that you bought at the store, which has sugar, usually a lot more sugar in it, preservatives. And so again, getting people to cook at home, if they can, is a good option. But if someone comes into the pharmacy and says, like, I work 80 hours, I've got 4 kids, can't really be saying to them, you should be cooking all your food at home, because it's not sustainable. But frozen foods are a good option if they can't get fresh fruit and vegetable every day. There are other options available which offer nutrition as well. So we've just gone from this wide variety of fruit and vegetables and all the different types of food groups. What happens if we eat too much of this food or too little of a certain food? We can get micronutrient deficiency, we eat too much, excess. And this is where we often see the health problems developing with certain micronutrients. So the UQ Extend went through the vitamins, so you've got your fat soluble, your vitamin A, D, E, and K, and then your water soluble, your B and the C. Your minerals, you've probably heard like sodium, right, is one. Too much sodium, problem with too much sodium is it leads to water retention. And you'll learn a lot about that next semester with cardiovascular. Potassium, magnesium, calcium, we do osteoporosis. We know calcium is really important for our bones. And as women in particular get older, they need more calcium. Then we have our trace elements. So iodine, fluoride, iron, and zinc. And I just want to provide, there was lots of examples on the UQ Extend, but I wanted to provide the example with iodine, and we'll do this in a couple of weeks when we look at the thyroid. So iodine deficiency was one of the most common micronutrient deficiencies in the world. It can still be in the third world, but it's not so much in the first world. Why? Why is it no longer, or not more prevalent as it was? What happened? Yep. Nice. Iodized table salt, and it's in bread as well. This reduced iron deficiencies significantly. And so when you look at, particularly the trace elements, we've done a lot of public health measures to reduce the deficiencies. So fluoride, where is fluoride? In our water in Brisbane. We have iron-fortified cereal. Most of the cereal you buy now has iron in it. And zinc deficiency, it's quite hard to get zinc deficiency. And oysters have a lot of zinc in them. But we don't see that too much of problems with it. So we've used a lot of public health measures to reduce these deficiencies. You can still see them in parts of the world, but less so here. When we see, where we do see it here is that women who are pregnant may need more, and so they may need to take supplementation. Now, as I said, we'll learn in a couple of weeks that iodine is really essential for thyroid hormones, and our thyroid regulates a lot of things in our body. And the problem with our thyroid is tight regulation. Too much and too little cause problems. So we have too little iodine, we can get hypothyroidism. With too much iodine, we can get hyperthyroidism. So we can see that these micronutrients are really, really critical to our body, and they play a really important role. And so I think this is where that eating a wide variety comes from, to ensure we're eating different foods to get all the micronutrients we need, as well as our carbs and our essential fats, and so on. So that's sort of the overview of diet. When we move on to physical activity, I think We think we just need to exercise to get fit, to grow muscles, but it's more than that. Really important thing with physical activity is it should be for life, and it should be more than just to get fit. It has so many benefits outside of appearing fit or having big muscles. It's really good for our heart, it's really good for our bones, our whole body. And so when we talk to people about that, I think it's important to point that out as well. And that's why now, like Apple has released a watch that has rings on it that tells you how much physical activity you have, because they're recognizing the importance of it. But people also not realizing that day to day we can go around doing it and not realizing it. It doesn't mean you have to put your shoes on and go for a run. You can walk up the stairs, go for a really brisk walk. Now, so the question is, I changed this. I had, why are you not physically active, to why might someone not be physically active? Can you think of what other reasons why we are not all doing our 30 minutes recommended a few times a week? Office jobs, yeah. Yep. Disability, nice, yep. Both physical and mental, not all disabilities you can see, and they will impact someone's ability to do physical activity, yep. Lack of time, yep. But then, like, what's everyone's screen time? I think this too, I'm like, lack of time. And I'm like, oh, 2 hours on my screen. Imagine I could do 2 hours of physical activity. Anything else? Lack of motivation, yep. I think particularly with gyms, like people, you don't have to join a gym, obviously, right, to be fit. You can do it in so many ways that may not cost money. But I certainly see with gyms that people, there's a real barrier to starting a gym. There's a vision that what you need to look like to be in a gym and that kind of thing, and that can really affect your motivation. I think time was a big one. Priorities is another one. It may not be a priority. People think they have to have the right equipment, the right shoes to start. Gyms are really expensive as well. Yeah. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, finding out the specific reason someone may not be doing physical activity. It's hard to ask that in a way that's not going to be judgmental, but working out what happens in their day and where we could fit it in. So this is, should be on your UQ Extend, but this is Mrs. Rashid. She has a new medication. She's been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. You now need to, like you would Neuroski, counsel her on some of the lifestyle changes to help her manage her diabetes. She mentioned she doesn't have time to exercise. She works as an office clerk. She cares for her family. There's not much time left. What are some strategies we could tell her to overcome this? You guys talk for a couple minutes. I gotta have some water. And then I'm gonna ask you. Okay, what do we think? What do we got? Yep. Yeah, nice, yep. Okay, guys, I knew I shouldn't have stopped. Let's make it a social activity. She could go out with her family. That's really helpful, right? Anything here? Nothing? What else could we tell her? Nothing, yes. Nice, yeah, yeah. If it was too far, say she catches the bus. It's too far, right? She's got to catch the bus. What could she do? What's something she could do on the bus? Yeah, she could get off the bus one stop early, right? That's like a sort of simple thing. It's a mindset change. It's like, I don't want to get off early, but then that's, if you have time, an easy way to make it fit in. What do I try and do at pace that, if you're on level 4, my office is on level 6, and usually I just go ding, up. What should I be doing? Taking the stairs, yeah. If I don't have my Apple Watch on, I take the lift because there's no point. My Apple Watch won't tell me what I'm doing, right? I have my Apple Watch on, I'll take the stairs so I don't get home and see 0 minutes of exercise. This is why Apple Watches work. I wouldn't suggest that someone gets an Apple Watch, but if they can afford it and they need a bit of motivation, which we mentioned before, there are other digital technology, there are a lot cheaper ones as well, that can really help by showing people motivation. Time does happen quickly. If you need to do 30 minutes in a day, you don't have to do it all at once. You could do it over different types. 10 minutes is actually quite simple to achieve, and you could do that by getting off one stop earlier, one stop later, and then a brisk walk in your break. So I think the first thing for this person is to acknowledge that you're right. She works, and this is most of us, right? We study, we work, we're busy. It is hard to take time. Let's think about where she could fit it in her day. And then help her with the motivation that even if you can't start with 30 minutes, 10 is still better. It's not 0 or 30, right? 10 minutes is still great. And some people who haven't been physically active or they're older should start slower, right? These people that start like now and they're like, I'm going to go do a marathon, that's not healthy either because they'll likely get injuries. And so the other part that we had is that medications that people take, and we know in Australia lots of people take lots of medications, they can affect their physical activity. I think a lot of people, you pointed out medicines that can make you drowsy, like next week we do opioids. And you're right, you're feeling drowsy, you're not going to go to do a run. And it may not be safe for you to do a run if you're feeling really drowsy. I think the other thing that people pointed out was cardiovascular, which we'll do next semester. And you're right, cardiovascular medicines do often alter your heart rate, your blood pressure, and they need to be careful to do vigorous exercise. But low intensity is often okay. The other one nicely pointed out was medications like retinoids that can affect how quickly you burn in the sun. And that's a really great point as well, that they've just been to the pharmacy and they've been told, okay, you're going to take this retinoid, you can't go out in the sun because you're going to burn really bad. And then you go and have another conversation and be like, you got to go for a run for 30 minutes. That's not going to happen. So they need to make sure they're not out in the sun at those times of days. So then bringing it, I guess, all together, and I wanted to do those first because we come to weight management and the medications we use for weight management, but again, it's not in silo. These things all work together, and diet and exercise have many benefits outside of weight management. And this is a tricky topic, right? It's a personal topic, and so as healthcare professionals, we always want to make it clear that our patient is our priority and their health is their priority. I think it's important that we don't necessarily have to verbalize this to our patients, but when we're thinking about all this, our priority is the healthcare view of a healthy weight and what health looks like versus this world view. These things often don't align. Okay? Someone can be viewed by the world view as skinny and not be healthy, and vice versa. And so I think keeping that in mind, that we are looking at it from a healthcare view, and then that comes out in our conversations. I think it's more respectful, and patients will open up about these discussions with you. So obesity, particularly we use the word obesity rather than overweight because a lot of the information and the studies are done show that poorer outcomes are with obesity rather than overweight. Obesity is more than just an imbalance between the energy in and the energy out. The development of obesity can be influenced by many factors. It can be influenced by food intake, physical activity, but there's also these physiological and psychological factors and genetics. That people can be genetically predisposed. Our genetics influence the proteins our body make. There's a protein in your gut that stimulates appetite, and some people have more of that. So they are predisposed to obesity because they have a greater appetite because of these proteins. And so that's really important to keep in mind as well, that it's not just that someone is eating too much or not exercising. It is very complex, and two people could have the same diet, the same exercise, and be very different weights. The other thing to point out is where we are now, this has not always been the way, that for centuries and centuries, and you look back at photos, that there's been opinions about what the ideal weight is for a long time. And so we go back to now, how do we define weight as potentially overweight or obese? How do we define it? What is it based on? BMI, yep. And how do we calculate BMI? What was that? Height and weight, yep. So we do calculations in this course, and BMI is one that I expect you to know. We'll do it tomorrow in the tutorial because it's a simple one. It gives us an idea, and it classifies people as underweight, healthy, overweight, obese. There's ideal body weight, total body weight, just hopping on a scale. So there's many different ways we can classify people. BMI is a common one, and a lot of the cardiovascular risk is associated with someone's BMI. And so that takes into account obviously their weight, but also their height. The other thing to remember is that most weight loss strategies, diets, are not sustainable for a number of reasons. The first reason being, we talked about, weight loss diets are often restrictive and it can't work long term. If you like chocolate, and you should enjoy chocolate, you can't go on a diet that restricts your chocolate intake forever. It's not sustainable, and it's not an enjoyable way to live, right? And so one of the reasons they're not sustainable is because they're very restrictive. They could be restricted of you can only eat meat. That's still not sustainable long term. They can be an option if people want to try them short term, but one of the other reasons they're not is because of adaptive thermogenesis. And this is our body's protective response to stopping us losing excessive amounts of weight when there's been changes in the environment. So if our body senses that we're on a different diet than we were, what's going on? I need to protect my body. This is adaptive thermogenesis. And so what I want you to know is that this exists, and this is why we see people who, they used to have these shows about weight loss, and they'd lose a heap of weight, and then a few weeks later, it just stopped. But they were still doing the same thing, and that is what is because of adaptive thermogenesis. We know that medicines can impact weight. We'll go through a lot this semester about, you'll look at the side effects and it'll say weight gain, or it'll say anorexia, which is the term that they'll use in side effects for weight loss, or it'll change someone's appetite. This becomes really important to know when someone comes into your pharmacy asking about, they've gained some weight, why could it be? They've lost some weight, why could it be? But it's also really important when you're talking to a patient or having a discussion about a medicine they may be starting, and they may be overweight or obese. And the really good example again was with diabetes. When we choose medicines for diabetes, there's medicines that can cause weight gain, and there's medicines that can cause weight loss. And if someone is already overweight, you don't want to give them a medicine that's going to make that worse. It's the same in depression. When we do depression, certain medicines can cause weight gain, some can cause weight loss. Weight gain can be really helpful if someone is depressed and has no appetite and they're losing weight. That would be really helpful. But it'd also be very unhelpful if someone's depressed, they're a little overweight or they're obese, they're aware of that, and then you give something to make them put on more weight. And so it plays a really important role in a number of ways. So this is another one. Joseph, he comes in the pharmacy, asks for a weight loss supplement. He tells you that his weight's been creeping up over like the last 6 months, and now he doesn't know why it doesn't budge. What's some questions that we could ask Joseph to think? So obviously, what medications are you taking? But what about that could you ask to think, could it be medication related? Yep. Yep. So this is the big thing, right? And again, in your OSCE, we'll never try and trick you, but like, if you were thinking in your OSCE, could this be weight related? You'd say, when did the weight start to creep up, and when did you start taking this medicine? And for example, if this was an OSCE scenario, they'd be the exact, and we wanted you to get that, they would be the exact same time. And in real life, that's often the case as well. I started to take mirtazapine for my depression about 6 months ago. I'm feeling better from that now, but my weight's just bothering me. Well, we know mirtazapine can cause weight gain, and so that would be a really good option. So I think we've got across this, but remember that talking to our patients about these topics can be really sensitive. They may not be. They may be super open, and that's great. But I think for a lot of people, they are sensitive. Make sure you're compassionate. You are not judgmental. You do not know the person's situation, the genetics predisposing them to something, the culture that they live in, the food that they enjoy. And so it's really important to be compassionate. And then one really way to do that is make it clear that your priority is their health. And it's the healthcare view of what health is. We will practice these conversations a lot in our tutorials, and so you'll get lots of practice. This is the last bit, and then we'll have a break. I'll just get this done so we can come back and do ethics. So, medicines for weight management. Who can tell me what this is? Yep. Ozempic. Does everyone agree it's Ozempic? Yeah. So if I gave this workshop like 3 or 4 years ago, I would have been like, there's not much we can do for weight loss in terms of management of medicines. There's nothing that really works. And then Ozempic came along and it revolutionized the weight loss industry. Why did it revolutionize the weight loss industry in terms of drugs available? What is it about Ozempic? Does anyone know? Yeah? Yeah, nice. So it's a GLP agonist, but it actually reduced weight a lot. And so that's one of the reasons why it actually worked. Before that, we had things that weren't effective, or they gave us some nasty side effects. So as you said, it's a GLP-1. Now, we're going to actually, what is Ozempic used for? I'll tell you there. What is it actually used for? Diabetes. So it's a tricky one because I introduced it here, but we actually cover it in more detail in the diabetes module. So it's a GLP-1 agonist analog, and it basically stops people feeling hungry. And people say it's amazing, it works wonderfully. The problem with this is it causes a significant nausea in the first few weeks. It goes away, but it's something to be aware of, which is also contributes to the decreased appetite right in the beginning. It has specific indications here according to your AMH around the BMI that it should be used in. Now, I've got 2 pictures up here. So Ozempic that we talked about and Wegovy. They both contain semaglutide, which is what's in Ozempic. What's the difference? Price, yeah. Why is the price? Yeah. Yeah, nice. Is that, have you seen that in practice? Is that why you're, yeah. What is Ozempic indicated for? Yeah, what's Wegovy indicated for? Weight loss, right? So same drug, different indications. if you prescribe Ozempic for weight loss, what are you doing? You're prescribing it, is it off-label, right? So I had this discussion. I was like, well, there's no real implications in Australia for prescribing off-label. And so we do see this now, that the reason is that the drug company has come out so that Ozempic can be for people with diabetes and Wegovy can be people with weight loss. But they're the exact same drug. And when we're going to do an ethics case after this little break, this becomes an interesting discussion, all right? If they're both the same drug, they're indicated for different conditions, but we could use them off-label. So just keep that in mind. Tirzepatide. How is tirzepatide different to semaglutide? Has anyone heard or seen tirzepatide? Or what people might say about it? It's certainly not yet the Ozempic, right? But it's much newer in Australia. So tirzepatide is very similar. It's a GLP-1 analog, but it's also a GIP analog as well. And so what we think is because it does the two, it is more effective. From what I can see, the studies are still coming out about it, but they think the evidence is showing is slightly more effective. What this actually looks like in practice, we're not sure. It's a lot more expensive, but it works in a very similar way. The side effects are very similar. The indication is very similar. So these, I try and put this at the end of our UQ Extend module, the medications that we cover each module. And so the ones I mentioned, because they are now the ones that we use. Tomorrow we're going to do a case on Orlistat, and that's because Orlistat is something you can buy over the counter without a prescription in pharmacy. It was pretty much one of the only options prior to these new drugs coming out, but it has a bit of a nasty side effect that stops people using it, and we'll go through that a bit tomorrow. Now, I said that earlier that nutrition is a funny module because it's quite broad and big, but we will use this information most weeks when we understand the conditions because a lot of them have lifestyle-related information that is really important. Now, I have one really, really important question. So can you go on to the QR code? Are we on? I couldn't work. Someone was telling me to put it somewhere. I need to know, where do you want me to put these slides? If you don't care, I'll just use my own judgment. So I'll aim to upload these before the workshop. What was that? Blackboard. Okay, Blackboard it is. So I'll put them in a workshop folder on Blackboard, and then I'll put the workshops there, and I'll put the tutorial slide in as well on Blackboard. That's it from me. Come and have some questions. We're going to come back, so go have a break 10 minutes. We'll start at like 10 past 10, 8 minutes. Go get a drink or something, and I'll see you soon.
All right. We might make a start again. Can everybody hear me okay through the recording and the speakers? Great. So hello everyone, my name is Will. I am a community pharmacist and a PhD student here at the School of Pharmacy. My PhD has been in pharmacy ethics, and so I'm here to talk to you about ethical decision making. Why is ethical decision making so important? It's embedded in most of your professional decisions that you will make as a practicing pharmacist and indeed as a pharmacy student. Particularly when you go out on placements, you will be acting as a pharmacy student or a student pharmacist, and you will have to make ethical judgments in that capacity as well. To help you step into that role, this workshop and a series of tutorial activities will equip you with a vocabulary to work around ethical cases, as well as a practical framework to employ to work through some of the more difficult cases that you might come across. Some of that vocabulary comes in the form of these principles of bioethics. These are well represented in a number of different areas in the literature. We use these in healthcare quite a lot because they're just generally good ways to practice as a health practitioner. So we want to help people as beneficence. We want to prevent harm from coming to people. We want to treat people fairly. And we also want to respect the choices of people. So by being guided by these principles, we can generally know what a good way to practice as a health practitioner is. But these principles will also help us work through cases where it might be unclear what we should do. One of those cases is where there is a conflict between these principles. For example, our duty to help a patient might be in conflict with their issue or their autonomy in that they don't want you to help them. Generally, to resolve this, we go back to which of these principles is most important, and so we balance those principles out. In that example, where a patient must give you consent before you provide them with a medical treatment or procedure, usually the principle of autonomy overrides our duty to help patients in certain situations, but that judgment relies on contextual detail as much as background theory. We also have some other advice that helps us to resolve these issues in practice. Legislative frameworks are useful to a certain extent, and professional standards like the PSA's Code of Ethics can be useful in informing our ethical judgments. The best outcomes will align with all of this advice. So our ethical reasoning will align with what our legal standards tell us we can do and should do, and what our professional standards also say. But it might be the case that those don't align. And so the advice out there is that in rare situations, an ethical decision might require you to work outside of the law. Luckily, as pharmacists, the cases where this happens are very limited. Our legal standards continue to improve and align with our ethical capacity or ethical imperatives, and our legal capacity continue to align. To put some of this into practice, I have a case, and so this aligns with Holly's signposting of Ozempic and Wegovy as separate products. The case I'd like you to consider is this one. So you're working in a small pharmacy, a patient comes in with 2 scripts, one for Wegovy and one for Ozempic. In your dispensary fridge, you have 1 box of Ozempic, but no Wegovy, and both products are out of stock at the supplier. The patient asks that you dispense whichever product you have in stock. How do you proceed? And so I'll ask you in small groups or a larger group, if you'd like to form one, to talk through what your next steps would be or how you'd go about addressing this request. I'll give you 5 minutes to work through this one. You might want to look at extra resources online if you would like as well. All right. Let's give you 30 seconds to wrap up those discussions and then we'll come back as a group. Okay. Let's have a quick chat about what we came across there. Okay, and so what's going to help this, because we're such a large group, with this case, any of these cases, there's always extra information you can go and ask, right? What I'm going to limit you to, and potentially make your job a little bit harder, is to make your decision just on the information you have here. I believe there's enough information on there to make your judgment. And so, with that in mind, that really leaves us with two options, right? We can either supply it or not supply it. There might be sort of sub-points to that, not supply or supply, but let's focus on the supply and not supply. Who wants to give me a rundown of if they were going to supply it, why they are going to supply it? Did anyone decide that we should supply this? Is anyone brave enough to argue their case?
No one's going to give it.
How about the other side? Not supplying. Yes?
Since it's a suburban community, don't know if there's other people who might have diabetes. So
Nice.
what we will say to them, can't give it as a partial dosage because it only comes as a single thing. So you can't give them some and then say, to save the entire thing.
Nice. Gotcha. So you're wary that there's a patient where you've got a product that has a regulated indication for in the fridge. You may well have someone nearby that needs to have access to it. Gotcha. I think that's a pretty compelling reason, right? And that, when we go back to these principles of bioethical principalism, the justice, beneficence, maleficence, non-maleficence, and autonomy, we can talk about that on the principle of justice, right? And we can talk a little bit more or less about that, but that's interesting as well because that's justice in terms of a community effort. We're treating our community fairly. But what about this individual patient? So there's a case on the principle of justice where we're not treating this patient fairly. So that's where this conversation, I think, flips. But on that note, have I given anyone enough ammunition to argue the other case? Yes?
Well, okay, we're saying not just use that information, right?
Mm-hmm.
But based on that, we can't exactly say what they're using it. Well, they're using it for weight loss, right? But both drugs are the same, so technically, doesn't it still make sense to give it to them?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's still just one like product is going on, right?
Yeah. And
You're only really going to be able to help one person going forward. Either way, might as well just help the one person who's going to help.
yeah, nice. So that's kind of that debate on the principle of justice. So you've encapsulated that really nicely and using sort of practical context is that the drug's the same. Both patients have a reason, a future diabetes patient and the patient in front of you both have a valid reason for using it. It's the same drug. What differentiates those patients? And so, are there any other reasons that might compel you to dispense this one for the patient in front of you? Yes?
They are diabetic.
If they are diabetic. That's an interesting point. What are the risk factors for developing diabetes? So they're not diabetic at the moment. But might it be the case that a patient who has chronic or is overweight for a long period of time might be predisposed to developing type 2 diabetes? There we go. And so what's the difference then for, again on the principle of justice, between this patient developing type 2 diabetes potentially or helping them with weight loss in terms of how much of this product they end up using? If they're using it for weight loss, they might use it for 6 to 12 months. But if they have diabetes, they might be on this drug for several years. And so if we're talking about resource use, then that opens up a justification again that it's more and more of a valid use for this particular drug. We could talk about a whole bunch of other factors here, but one of the big points I want to get across is that both of these options are valid. So there is no right answer here, which can be uncomfortable with. In a lot of pharmacy courses, we deal with a correct answer or an incorrect answer. This does not mean that there are no wrong answers, which is the kicker. So there are several right answers, and the fact that they are right will always depend on how well you can justify them. And so if you give this box of Ozempic but don't give the right reason, ultimately the outcome's no different, but you're not, you might be neglecting some crucial thinking along the way. One of the things to help you with that thinking is the model which I will show you now, which is a model which has been developed to help you think through some of the key issues in a case. It breaks ethical decision-making down into 4 steps. The first is to identify the problem and the consequences of the problem. The second is to identify what the law and other professional standards tell you to do. The other is to list the options, pros and cons for each option. And the 4th step is to formulate a plan of action. Looking more closely at step 1, this requires us to gather some facts. So what information is available? What information might we still need to get? What's the ethical problem? This is where those principles of bioethics become really useful because they will make very clear what the problem is in some cases, what harms we're concerned about and who is affected. So how would we describe the ethical issue presented in our Ozempic/Wegovy case using these principles? I mentioned the principle of justice. Are there any other principles which are important here? Yes. Beneficence is, to me, one of the more obvious ones, right? We need to help our patient, and we have a duty to. Yes. What's that? Sorry, you've got. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha. So a couple of things there, but I think on the first point, yeah, you have the capacity to help someone, and that's a pretty big thing in this case. If you didn't have the capacity to help someone in this case, it makes your job a lot harder, but it doesn't excuse you from that duty of helping the patient. So maybe that in some cases in pharmacy will look like referring our patient on to someone else if we don't have stock. And the other is autonomy. This patient they've presented themselves in a situation where they can receive the supply of this in a way that isn't illegal. And so might it be the case, it could be argued that we should promote that patient's autonomy rather than letting us override their judgment. I think that's not as strong a case as the others that we've discussed, but still there nonetheless. Step 2, identifying the law and professional responsibilities that apply to the case. What if I was to ask you are our key legal frameworks that we use in pharmacy practice? you will become heavily exposed to these during tutorials and you'll become familiar with them to the extent that by the end of the semester we want you to have a working knowledge of what's contained and what they say in those documents. If I say the words NPMR, does that ring a bell? SUSMP, familiar with those? Privacy Act. So the Privacy Act in particular, we want you to become familiar with this semester because that affects you directly, perhaps mostly so as a pharmacy student on placement. Identify the best options for resolving the case. And these are some nice questions to ask yourself. What are good outcomes? And what are bad outcomes? An example of a bad outcome that we do see evidence of out there is where pharmacists act in their own interest rather than the interests of their patients. So when pharmacists are too liability focused and they make a decision based on, oh, what am I going to get in trouble for? That's not a particularly good way to measure what you should do in tricky cases or any case. A good solution, therefore, would be something that is in the best interest of the patients. And formulating an action plan. So in assessment tasks and in tutorials, we'll ask you to be explicit about your action plan and justifying your actions. A really nice thing to do here as well is to see if you can do anything to prevent a problem happening again. In this case for the Ozempic and Wegovy, maybe that looks like making sure you're on top of stock. But then again, working with stock shortages, which are external forces to you, can be equally difficult. This model is available in an interactive form on Blackboard, so you can go into dispensing and counselling resources and click on this link there. It's not very tidy when you export it, but it just gives you a place to do some working while you're working through these cases. And I encourage you to use that tool during tutorials when you work through these cases. For those interested, this paper came out just recently about the ethics of Ozempic and Wegovy. It breaks down some of those arguments that we discussed. If you have interest and time to read something like that, I'd encourage you to. Thanks. Are there any questions? Great. Thank you. I'll just check in with Holly to see if... That's it? Great. Thank you.